All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. This is our first meeting of our Property Care Ordinance Working Group. And so we'll just start out with some introductions, and then I'll talk a little bit about why we're gathered here, what the plan is, how we're going to advance, and how we're going to come up with a draft property care ordinance. So let's start with myself, and then we'll just go around the tables. I'm Dan Folk. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Flagstaff.
I'm Abel Estrella. I'm Sunnyside Neighborhood Association Subcommittee on Museum Fire, not club. Subcommittee on just trying to gather some money to help that project.
Go ahead.
Rick Lopez. I'm with the Northern Arizona Association of Realtors and the Government Affairs Director for them. That's it.
I'm Steve Thompson. I am the volunteer and event coordinator for the City of Flagstaff Sustainability Office.
I'm Valeria Chase. I have a joint position between the City of Flagstaff and NAU as a neighborhood liaison.
John Austin, property manager here in town for David Carpenter Hope Construction.
Oh, thanks for coming, John. Yeah.
I'm Laura Myers with La Plaza Vieja Neighborhood. Michelle McNulty with the City of Flagstaff. Tiffany Anton with the City of Flagstaff.
Jesse Dominguez with La Plaza Vieja Neighborhood Association.
And I'm Sarah Dexter. I'm also with the city.
Jordan Hollinger with the City of Flagstaff.
So Jordan's going to be our scribe this morning. So thank you, everybody, for coming. The first thing we're going to do, even before I start talking about our kind of why we're gathering and what our schedule is to establish some ground rules. And so I just started us off with a couple. And so these are kind of things we'll follow. You know, I've been calling it an informal group. It's not a group that's been appointed by council. It's really open to anyone who wants to come and participate. I'm calling it a working group, but it's really just an open public meeting. But we do want to make sure we have some ground rules so that we can be productive. Folks have a chance to participate. I think with the turnout we've had today, we'll have plenty of time for everyone to participate. But a couple that I recommended were, number one, let all participate, right? So don't dominate the discussion. It's nice if you turn off your phone or turn the volume down so that it doesn't become a distraction. Obviously, if you need to take a call, feel free to get up and take that call outside. Most of you have been here before. There are restrooms, so obviously feel free to use the restrooms. And then, does anyone else have any ground rules they want to recommend? We'll just capture them up here. Everyone's going to get along, Steve?
Assume positive intent.
All right, that's a good one. Any other ground rules anyone wants to throw out? I think all of you have participated in a lot of public meetings, so we probably don't have to worry too much about our ground rules. All right, let's move on to the purpose of the working group and our schedule. And so really, at this point, it's probably coming up on 2 years again since council gave direction to start working on a property maintenance ordinance. There was a PMO brought to council back in 2012, and it's what I call off the shelf. So it was kind of something out of a published code book, a property maintenance ordinance, and Roger Eastman at the time worked on it for several years. Finally, in 2012, the council at that time decided not to adopt it. And so it's never been put in place. And so, once again, I think it was Jesse, I believe, didn't you do a petition, Jesse, or a letter to council asking that they consider a property maintenance ordinance? And then it got put on as a future agenda item request. And council supported, directing staff to go ahead and, start working on a property maintenance ordinance. And so we're doing it under their direction. We're not really here to debate whether we should have a property maintenance ordinance. And I guess I should go back. We're going to rebrand it as the Property Care Ordinance. So we're going to call it a PCO. We're really not here to debate whether we should prepare a draft or not because we've gotten that direction. Certainly discussions about what should be in it, what the potential impact is, challenges that may come with certain provisions. I think that's all very appropriate, but this idea of whether we should or shouldn't be doing it, that's not really the purpose of this group. And so our goal is to prepare a draft, and the goal is to get it in front of council in September. They take a summer break between the beginning of July and the end of August. They do one meeting at the end of August, and then I'll plan to get on the first work session in September, so it would be the second Tuesday of September. And we'll probably get it on, would be a work session item, right? So for discussion, and that's a great opportunity for the public to give why they like it or don't like it, what should change, or why they shouldn't adopt it, or why they should adopt it. And then if council's comfortable, they'll advance it to a regular council meeting, and it'll be adopted by ordinance, so that requires at least 2 public hearings and 2 readings, or 1 public hearing and 2 readings. So that's our purpose. We do already have a conflict with the schedule, so we've scheduled these to be on the 2nd and 4th Thursday for the next 3 months. The 2nd Thursday today is going to be a 1 o'clock meeting. The 4th Thursday is going to be a 5 p.m. meeting. But 2 weeks from today, we're having a neighborhood meeting for the La Plaza Vieja neighborhood plan. So we're working on a character overlay. And so we don't want to have a conflict that night with the La Plaza Vieja meeting. And so we can either move that meeting up that day. So instead of having it at 5, we could do it this time, or we could try to find another day. So I'm curious what the feeling of this group is.
Did you wanna have a Zoom meeting, or what were you thinking?
We can make these Teams or Zoom. My intent was to keep them in person, but if we're not gonna have good participation, we can do this, we can do a hybrid meeting.
The only reason I'm asking is because we don't have a meeting place in Vieja,
Right.
so maybe if we can meet here, or so we don't really have a meeting schedule only as needed.
Right.
you're talking about the Plaza meeting?
I think the neighborhood meeting is gonna be really well.
That's for,
Mark.
but this is for the consultants.
So the La Plaza Vieja meeting I mentioned is part of the city's project to create the character overlay.
Okay.
And so it's a neighborhood meeting in La Plaza Vieja. We are gonna have it at the church. And we've got a consultant who's holding that meeting. We're gonna be there.
Okay, I'm
working with the
sorry.
consultant. No, it's not one of your association meetings. It's for the project, the character overlay. And we just don't wanna have these 2 meetings at the same time. They're gonna be competing meetings. And so we're thinking of moving this one up to earlier in the day. We do have Murdoch reserved for that day. I'd have to check with Deb if it's available at 1. To me, that's the easiest thing, is keep it on the same day, or we could consider a different day at 5 o'clock.
I'm fine.
Keeping it, let's move it to 1? All right. All right. So any other thoughts on the purpose of what I've just talked about and what we're gonna try to achieve here before we get into actually what should be into, what do you want to see in an ordinance? What issues do you want to see addressed? That's our next topic, but any questions or comments on what I've said so far? I see lots of, let's proceed, yes?
And just one thing, I just kind of prepped for this, I was, and you already said it, what do we wanna see? Also maybe what we don't wanna see.
That's a good question as well, yes. So let's just dive into that. You know, I gave a handout with some categories that Mark has identified. So it's the handout labeled property care ordinance, property care standards. So we put out these 10 different kind of categories of standards. And then what we would do is there would be specific issues that are captured by these 9 categories. So I thought we'd start by saying, what are the issues you want to see addressed? And then we'll come back and make sure they're covered by one of these categories. Is something missing, right? And then we need to expand the categories. And so what are the kind of issues that you feel should be a priority? You know, typically property care ordinances, they deal with the condition of a building, right? So the exterior condition, the siding, the doors, the windows, the roof, that they're operable, that you don't have rotten materials that are failing. Peeling paint can be addressed in a property maintenance ordinance. And then the condition of the property itself, right? So accumulation of trash and debris is one we hear a lot about. Storage of materials. So what I thought we'd start with is just throw out the topics that you think should be addressed, right, in a PMO, like peeling paint, yes or no. And then, yeah, what shouldn't be addressed as well, Abel. I think we could just go either way on that. So let's start with what should be in it, in your mind. What kind of issues should we be addressing?
Well, for me, debris accumulation in my, and I'm gonna speak just for my neighborhood. You know, we have a lot of, anymore, used to be a lot of home ownership, there's not as much anymore. And so renters, landlords are placing their debris, when people move out, they're just taking it to the edge of the street and just dumping it anytime. And it's happening way too often. It was kinda nice that we had our neighborhood curb and guttered a few years ago. And so the whole neighborhood looks better, except for those that like to put accumulated debris, you know, at the side anytime. Now, there's a time and place to do that.
Right.
Because there's a, you know, and I think just before, and there's a schedule. And when people do that, don't have a problem.
Right.
But it's when they do it, you know, a month ahead of time, and now it's gonna sit there.
Right.
And people start putting more stuff on top.
Yeah. So this would be, bulky pickup, like before,
Bulk pickup.
before your week. Usually those
Right.
are, it's the week that you do bulky pickup, you're supposed to put it out. Yeah, that's a good one. So the timeliness of putting your,
Your debris out,
good, yeah, I think you captured it. Okay. What else?
We sort of have the same problem in Paso Viejo where debris is dropped off on city property and it stays there forever. So it's one of those things, and nobody did it. It's just like a home, nobody did it. And so it's one of those, you know, where the timeliness, it'll sit there for a month, especially if it's the bulk item goes this week, they dump it next week, and it'll be there for 3 weeks until the next time.
So like illegal dumping on city property.
Yeah, is there any kind of enforcement? I don't know.
I think we call it illegal dumping. If you're putting it on city property, do you think people put it there because they know it's owned by the city?
Mhm.
Like on a city parcel or a city lot?
Yeah.
Very good.
I think some of the other challenges that we have are, and I manage property in all of these communities, is when you drive down the street, you'll see trash cans out on the street all week long, not just the day that it needs to happen.
Right.
So I think there needs to be some type of change to where they go out the night before and they come in the following day. In my neighborhood where I live, if I leave it out, we get fined for it. It just can't just sit out 24/7. But it's a challenge. It makes the community not look so hot.
Yep. That's a good one. Excellent. Thank you. What else?
I think kind of tying into everything that's been mentioned is the enforcement aspect, like the protocol of who's responsible for what, and I don't know if that is something that gets spelled out in the ordinance or something after the fact. Some sort of step-by-step process of who's responsible for
Yeah.
what.
I don't know if it'll say who's responsible, but it definitely will have a section on penalties and how it's enforced, right?
Yeah.
So what's the process to enforce these rules? That has to be included in there. But typically, I think we're looking at code compliance. Solid Waste gets involved with these issues with Reggie and his team. So Reggie basically works with kind of whatever the appropriate other division is, but usually code compliance is going to be taking the lead on these kind of issues.
I don't know if this one would go under standards, but possibly including some way of communicating and reporting
Okay.
the infraction.
So a way to report the issue to the city.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the 311 or something like that.
I think now people pick up the phone or email, right? Maybe there could be some other tool that people could use. Laura?
Bushes that are out of control and they start covering the house, like half of the house,
All right.
and you couldn't see if someone was behind there. We had issues with that.
So overgrown
Bushes and shrubs.
bushes and shrubs. What else? So far, everything's been about, I think, in the property realm, which is fine. And by the way, these are the issues that pulled the best, right, in terms of priority. So I was gonna share that as well. Jordan downloaded the latest polling results, and it's just been an open poll that we kept open. And the number one issue in terms of what would you like to see covered in a property care ordinance, 67% said trash and waste. And yeah, I have the latest over on the table if you didn't pick it up. The next highest response was 66% general junk accumulation. I'm looking at page 5, I believe it is. 65% unused and non-working vehicles or other broken equipment, so inoperable vehicles. Fourth was general debris accumulation. So really 3 of the top 4 were really about kind of what we're talking about here, right? Waste and debris. 43% then got to building deterioration. So I would say the support for, you know, what we're talking about, the property and the outside seems to pull a little higher than structures themselves, although still good support for vacant building. I guess that was vacant buildings, 36%. Oh, building deterioration was at, 43%. So there is more support, I would say, generally from the poll, and it's not scientific, it's just voluntary, whoever logged in. It was mostly about the property itself, I would say.
I think building deterioration is huge. When you drive through the communities, no matter where they are, as you know, you'll see houses that clearly the owner is passionate about their house, cares about it, and it looks beautiful. And then there are some places that are just shacks that you're like, why aren't we doing something about this?
Right.
And in my mind, I'm always like, how come code compliance isn't stopped by here? But I don't want to be the same guy that's also calling up, you know, Reggie, and like, hey Reggie, can we get on this? But I think some of those things need to be addressed out there.
So then this is where the big change would be, I think, is really on structures. Really right now, our only, the only thing we really consider is the structure safe, right? So if there's something that happened to the structure that really makes it unsafe, we'll have our building department go out and look at it, and then they have to secure it so that it's, you know, we don't have things that say you have to paint your house, you have to have operable doors or windows. We don't have those types of things. And so this is where a property care ordinance could get into these issues. And so you're speaking about the general condition of buildings, right? So do you think we should be including things like peeling paint, rotted wood? I mean, we can get as general. I mean, I think we do need to be somewhat specific on the condition of the building, right? What are the conditions we want to address?
I think that will be kind of hard to do because you're like, when is the paint peeled too much, you know what I mean? But I think, I believe I read it somewhere and I was trying to find it. If there is like a fund where if people can't afford to do it, then maybe, you know, Habitat or the city could get volunteers or the neighborhood to come and help.
Right.
Because we've done that before, we've got paint and help people paint their houses. Because a lot of people don't wanna give information for,
Right.
you know, nonprofits that wanna help, so there needs to be a way we can get funding for that.
And I think this is the idea we've been talking about, right? Because we've met on this a few times in preparation for this formal kickoff. Is the enforcement is so important, right? And you know, the concept is we're going to have resources available for folks who don't have the funds to maybe paint their house. And so we do, and council I think is in favor of this, is funding some kind of an annual amount where people could, you know, have to define who's eligible, right? Typically it'd be probably some income qualification to show you don't have the means to take care of it yourself. But then there could be grants for things like painting the house, or even creating a volunteer group maybe that goes out and helps a citizen with that, and maybe some of the costs are covered through the grant, something like that. So I've been trying to toy with this idea of what's the in-between, right? In between writing somebody up for having peeling paint and getting them the resources to help, right? What's the in-between? What do we just make contact with that person? Should we be citing them? What do you think?
This is the part that becomes, my house is made out of World War II ammunition boxes, just like a lot of houses in Sunnyside, and it's trimmed with asphalt siding that I covered because I couldn't wait to get it done. But there's still a lot of houses that have that stuff, and I'm like, we shouldn't be judging that those are no longer appropriate for our neighborhood.
Right.
It's Sunnyside, you know, it's not Continental, and I don't want it to be Continental.
Mhm.
You know, it's, you know, typically, it's one of the low-income areas, affordable housing areas outside of NAU
Mhm.
in Flagstaff, which is Sunnyside, and so there's not a whole lot of people making $300,000 or $500,000 in that neighborhood. You know, it's what, 10,000 neighbors and once, you know, in that square mile that's
Right.
there. So we just all I'm saying is let's be careful with that, you know, and because that was one of the things let's not be, you know, like have ordinances like they have in Continental.
Yeah.
The gated communities.
So one of the challenges is maybe what are appropriate materials? Maybe we can capture that. And what are appropriate exterior materials if we're gonna start enforcing the condition of those materials, right? But I need to learn more about your home. This sounds really
I'm
interesting.
curious
Maybe
too.
it's constructed out of, did you say ammo boxes and covered with
A
shingles?
lot of them are because of World War, because of
That was very
World War.
common.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're
There's a couple in
12 by 12 by 5 foot stacked on top of each other.
Did they fill it with concrete or
No,
something? or
it's
they're
dead
just-
airspace and it's good. It, you know, and the outsides are filled with either papers, newspapers, just covered, or it has that black tar paper. And then the inside is done normal, the outside has the thicker, shingle type material.
So this was, I'm guessing, in the, I guess, second half of the 40s?
Right,
post-World War II,
second half of
early
the 40s,
50s.
when all that wood became available, people started building houses with it.
It's like the original sustainable.
My walls are
House
this
in
thick. My walls
Flagstaff.
are this thick.
Yeah, that's really cool. I have not heard about these homes before.
There's a bunch inside.
You know, kind of partnering on what Amy was just saying, I think we've gotta be really careful regarding fairness. Because I could see us getting, because basically what we're trying to do is create an HOA. Essentially, that's what this is. And we need to be really, really careful that all the enforcement and focus isn't on Sunnyside, Old Town,
Right.
South Side, you know, and, you know, because when you drive around some of these other neighborhoods that don't have an HOA, most of them are pretty nice, and there's really no issues there. So I could see there being some criticism on the part of the city, especially if we're issuing fines and we're doing this kind of stuff, and all the focus is on those specific neighborhoods. I can just imagine what the city's gonna be painted as, by people who live in those areas. So I think we have to be very, very careful. We're walking a very thin line on this whole issue.
Yeah. No, and this is one of my talking points from past meetings is I think this can be a tool to try to help preserve our housing stock. We don't want it to become a weapon, right, that drives people off their property. Because I think it has been used in other communities. It could contribute to gentrification, right, displacing people, getting homes torn down because they're in disrepair and building something back that is pushing people out of the neighborhood. So we saw this as a tool to maybe keep people in the neighborhood, right? And that's why we want to offer that assistance to people who don't have the means, perhaps. But I'm not hearing a strong support for us really saying peeling paint gets you a ticket from code compliance. Laura?
I think it's more the dilapidated places that they're renting to students, absentee landlords that really don't care, they're just collecting rent from the kids that are, or the people that are renting, so I think it's more of an absentee landlord than homeowners that are really trying. And that's why I said I wanna make sure that there's something just in case they can't afford to help themselves.
So are there conditions you think that are different on the rental properties than like owner occupied, or, because for us, the challenge is, you know, we have to consider the condition, not who's living there, right? Whether it's a rental or an owner.
I just know in Pleasant Vieja, we've had a lot of issues.
Yeah.
With absentee landlords that just don't really care, that's not, they don't live there.
Right.
You know, back in, when I was on the council, back in the 90s, I was operating a nonprofit called Christmas Banquet, where we went in and we rehabbed homes in one day. It's kind of that barn raising type of mentality. And we did about 100 houses over a 10 or 12 year period of time. 90% of those were owned by elderly women who had no family here. Jeez, I turned this off several times.
That's fine.
And you know, they were owner occupied, and they were owned by elderly widows who had nobody to help them, and they were pretty low income. You know, they got very little Social Security. That's what they were living on. And their roofs were coming apart, the siding on their house was bad, the cabinets were bad, the floor coverings were bad, and we go in and we redo all of these houses. But I mean, I do know that there is certainly a relationship between absentee landlords who don't care. But there's also a lot of owner occupied properties out there that are owned by elderly people, and they don't have the physical capability or the financial capability to do these things. And that, I think that's where we have to be very careful how we purchase.
So you think we should be proactive in reaching out to folks? Like if we find a property that really needs some work done, you know, peeling paint, maybe you see a sagging roof, right? That we should be proactively reaching out rather than contacting them about correcting it, offering an opportunity. I don't know, I'm just think we always end up on enforcement here. But.
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of like, you know, I have a couple of rental properties, you know, that are in HOAs.
Right.
And one down in El Mirage, I get a notification once in a while that the weeds are growing or that they didn't take the trash cans back fast enough. That seems to be the two biggest things. And so I have to deal with those things, but I get a notification that's courtesy notice, you have this much time to deal with it. If you don't deal with it this time, the next notification, you're gonna get fined $28 or whatever the fine is. So I don't know how we go about doing the enforcement part, because I do think we need to provide some kind of notification to the homeowner. But within that notification, I think we need to identify whether this person has the financial capability of dealing with whatever the problem is that we're trying to address. Because if they don't have the financial capability, you know, we're gonna get into that gentrification issue, we're gonna get into all kinds of issues that I don't think where we wanna go as a community.
Right.
So I think we have to be careful with that. I think being proactive is good. If we have some kind of funding mechanism to support it, or we have a partner with a nonprofit who does those kinds of things. I know a lot of the homes, I think Jesse and I talked about this some time ago, had to do with that Arrowhead Village that isn't there anymore.
Yep.
But a lot of those properties were terribly unsafe. They were totally out of code. They had electrical problems that could have started a fire and people could have died, you know. I mean, there was all kinds of issues there that I think once we have an ordinance in place, if there is some kind of health and safety issue that is specific to that, we need to get those corrected, because if we have a property maintenance ordinance and we don't pursue those, I think the city's gonna be setting themselves up for lawsuits if all of a sudden the house burns down because they had bad wiring in the house and we didn't do anything about it, even though we've done property maintenance ordinance. I think it could create a problem.
Yeah.
You know, you said something about, and there's two, SNA is here and so is Plus. You know, it could be that if it's, a house is identified, it goes to one of our groups. And then we go to maybe Estrella's house or Rick Lopez's house and say, Rick, you know, this thing's happening. But we're doing it through a local association initially. But you're right, you know, we write this up, guess who's gonna be liable? It's gonna be them. So, you know, but if we could handle it through an organization initially, and if nothing happens, no matter what help we may offer, then the next steps need to be taken. in order for it to get fixed.
Yeah, that might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, so this is a concept that we've talked about too, so like working with the neighborhood associations on,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to speak for you, Jesse, I just.
No, I have a comment also, is that I don't think the city needs to be proactive. I think it needs to be complaint driven. The people that know where all the bad houses are or whoever lives next door to it. So I don't think the city needs to be knocking on doors just because. I mean, there's already the fear of the city's gonna take my property away. I mean, from the old folks. And so to me, I don't think it should be proactive. I think it should be complaint driven, which is, I think, what it is now.
it's not.
It's not?
No,
Okay.
we've had this discussion.
So, I mean, to me, it's like, and I also see there's no data of what's happening right now. I mean, is there any reports that we can even look at,
There is,
so that, what are the complaints right now
yeah.
to base this off of? I mean, I don't think, I mean, all of our abandoned buildings are gone now. They've become student housing and they've become
Plaza Vieja.
other stuff in Plaza Vieja.
Yeah.
So we, at one time with, City Manager Wilcox, I think we had 18 abandoned vehicles in our little tiny little neighborhood, and they're all gone now. The sad thing about it, they could have been affordable housing. So, but I don't like the proactive stuff.
Yeah.
I think it should be complaint driven. And like I say, if it's that bad, somebody's gonna complain.
Right.
And then that triggers something.
So our overall code compliance program, we do respond to complaints, but we also initiate what I call a call on service or initiate a case. And we actually had pretty strong direction from council probably 5 or 6 years ago, because there was this misunderstanding that all we did was respond to complaints, and it creates this tension between neighbors but the issue with only responding to complaints, Jesse, is if there's a garbage issue and we show up at that house, that there's 3 other houses with the same issue, we can't just talk to that one homeowner. You have to do it equally, right? So you have to go through the neighborhood and kind of look at that issue neighborhood-wide. But we do have a monthly report, and I'm starting to get it out there more frequently. And I'll send you the link to it where we post it. And it gives a great breakdown of every case of the month, how many have been resolved. And Reggie's got it all broken out by categories. So it's got garbage in there, graffiti, vehicle parking, it's a long list of things. Clearing sidewalks. And then he also recognizes how many were from a complaint and how many were staff initiated. And about 70% of our calls are actually initiated by staff. So there is this big myth that we only respond to complaints, but we just cannot operate that way. And I don't think it gives the community the best service. So on this particular issue, I know this is gonna be a hard issue to get around. If it's gonna, I don't know if we could take one thing like the PCO and say that's only gonna be complaint driven, but everything else we're gonna, kind of enforce equally. But let's keep talking about it. I mean, we need to get past this issue because I know that is one of your big requests on this.
Can I ask a what about?
Sure.
So one thing, Mark Revis, who's the neighborhood planner, is not able to be here today because he's at one of his kids' graduations. But he brought up a couple times that, when we have a building where maybe it's been vacant for a while and the windows get broken, like the one that the city owns at the corner, and you own at the corner of Lone Tree and Butler right here in the Southside neighborhood. The only thing we have in the requirements is that it be secured, so that just means covering all the windows with plywood. And it can stay like that for years and years and years. Some cities require you put windows back in or require that there's at least one window so people can see inside the building. Do you have concerns about buildings that are in that kind of condition where they truly are vacant and they're either awaiting demolition or they've been sort of left because they're tied up in court or, people's estates get tied up? This kind of thing happens all the time. What about properties that are in those kind of condition? Where there's not a homeowner and there's not a renter and it might be in some other state or status?
Like any of you on the buildings on South Hill Road.
Yeah, the restaurant and yeah.
Yeah, like the rest.
Exactly.
And so this is another big area I was gonna get to, so abandoned properties, right? So like Sarah just said, right now, all we can do is require them to secure the property, right? So if it's abandoned, nobody's been living in it, and people break in, it becomes a nuisance. Windows are broken, the doors, we can contact the owner and say, you need to secure it, right? And so they put up boards over the windows, boards over the door. There's a property on Kutch, which is just a very infamous property that we've been dealing with for like 20 years. And it's just this never ending, you gotta go board it up again, right? But PMOs can treat it differently. It can say within 6 months of being notified, you have to put in operable doors, operable windows. We can't require somebody to live in the unit, but we can prohibit it just being boarded up endlessly. And to me, this is an opportunity to make some real progress on our abandoned buildings. So this is a topic I was gonna explore. Do we want that feature in a property care ordinance, that you can't just board up your property indefinitely, that there's gotta be some time frame that you actually put in, bring it back to life?
I think so, I mean, because unfortunately, with NAU, we don't have any leverage, because we can't tell NAU what to do. But, it's a real, there's been several buildings along South Milton Road that have just been boarded up or fenced in or whatever, and it creates a really horrible image of our community for people driving in, and all they see is one building after another that's fenced in, boarded up. It would be better if they just tore them down. It would be a better image to see vacant lots than to see a bunch of boarded up buildings. So I think we should. I'm just surprised. For example, I keep picking on NAU, but I'm just surprised that they don't have a better recognition of how important they are to the community and the message that they're sending with these boarded up buildings, what that does to the community. And I'm just baffled by how they've allowed that to go on for years. But that's just me. But the privately owned buildings, the commercial buildings, I think if we had an ordinance that would require something beyond just putting a fence around it and letting it sit there for years, I think we need to have something.
Did you have a comment, Tiffany? And then I'll come to you next.
The gas station on Milton Road.
Yeah.
Has been a long-standing one, I think, too, and I think the struggle for us has been, they've kind of been in this sort of never-ending, like, having development cases in review, and so I think we tend to be lenient when we see a developer or property owners trying to work through the property, but some of those can also just be delay tactics. Also understanding the economy and everything else, but they become sites for graffiti and control, and I agree that chain link fences, fencing off the property, especially on your main core of town, it's a little bit disappointing. And I know the hotel that burned and had a fire is also a real struggle, so trying to work with those commercial property owners and not just the residential.
Right.
I just wanted to respond. I think, in regard to the properties that NAU owns, they are part of the NAU master plan. So those conversations are happening right now. But it's good to know that, like that some residents feel like, well, that's an eyesore. Well, we know that it's an eyesore, right? But we also know that a lot of residents will kind of like, just like be very like upset as well, like once it gets torn down, and like what is NAU doing now, and like taking over the city, things like that. But like, what I hear recently was the opposite of what you said. So I think it's good to know that, and I'll take it back to who's giving me that information as well.
Sure, I think a lot of it just has to do with communication. What do they plan to do? What are they intending to do? What is their time frame? NAU, unlike some of these commercial properties, like for example, the hotel was fenced in for years. I noticed it just got reopened. Okay, well, during the pandemic, hotels weren't doing very well. There was no money coming into any of those. So I get that, that doesn't have the same connotations with any use, so to speak. They bought a lot of property, they're spending a lot of money. So it's nice if those are broke and they can't do it, but what is their plan and by when? I think those are things the public needs to know. I think a lot of people just say, anyone just gets to do whatever they want and they don't care. I mean, that's the attitude that I hear from a lot of people.
And I think with this situation, it's like they are trying to be very sensitive to like what the community feels about it. So, but I'll take that back to the communication part of it as well, like to share that and to make sure that it's like that miscommunication is there. And I think that there's assumptions on the news side as well that can be addressed.
Yeah, Tiffany, go ahead.
Could there be an education component to all of this? And I know we bring up very specific neighborhoods, but I definitely, the green law, and upper green law, lower green law, certainly, they don't have a neighborhood association, but it's also an area that I think sometimes struggles with some of these issues, but, and education, especially in communities that don't have sidewalks and don't have some of those other things about where, when you leave your trash cans out. And I watched so much success with your program.
Community welcome?
Yeah, and pre-pandemic, and I think it had some really great impacts. But I think, taking those things out to the broader city as well, because there are other neighborhoods that aren't always necessarily impacted by NAU, but still have some issues.
Yeah. No, we definitely have other neighborhoods interested in this topic. I've reached out to some of those folks. Hopefully we'll get more participation from other than just our three neighborhoods that are in the League of Neighborhoods. So there seems to be some general agreement that we should do something about our current rules on abandoned buildings, that there shouldn't just be this endless ability to just board it up, put a fence around it. I'm seeing a lot of head nods, yes.
That's where quality of life comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Houses, all nice.
Yeah. Well, they become dangerous because people squat in them, and we've had fires in these units. We've had issues where it's so overgrown and all that, it becomes a harborage for vermin, is what the health department calls it, right? You have rats and things living there.
That's what I feel about Arrowhead Mobile Park. And I brought it to different people. It's overgrown. If someone throws.
Oh, the current condition?
What's that?
The current condition of Arrowhead?
Yeah, it's all fenced in,
Okay.
I just think it's a hot mess. And you come in there and you go, nobody cares. And that's not true that nobody cares. And then I believe that the APS boxes are no longer hot or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
But that's a concern. There's a lot of concerns in that little corner.
Yeah.
So.
It's chain link fence, but the chain link fences have been run over and crushed and what have you, so they're not really security.
Yeah.
So who's in charge of security there? Would it be the PMO or the PCO, that kind of stuff, follow up, I guess?
Right.
Sort of like what Rick's talking about. And I dropped by Granny's Closet and I just remember it's so vibrant and people just waiting in line, the kids having a good time and all that stuff. Now it's just, another thing that's still sitting there is a lumberjack with an axe. And I'm wondering when he's gonna go. But I mean, it is an eyesore for the whole city of Flagstaff.
Yeah.
So if you go down Blackbird Roost, you see the same eyesore. If you go down to the Gables, we're dating ourselves. Right?
Yeah.
But anyways, so you see the same eyesore. There's a gas station. I always look in there, see the guy still stood in the corner sleeping. And that's the stuff that I think would really help the city as a whole.
Yeah. And maybe we as staff need to go out and look at some of these properties and think about, what are our current rules, how they apply to this property, and what could a PCO apply. I'm glad you brought up Arrowhead Village, because that's, I think, a real challenge when it's a vacant property, right? And it's fenced in, it's treated like it's a boarded up building, but it's vacant, but yet there's still property issues with it. And so let's look at that property and what could we gain from a PCO in getting this property in a better condition when it's vacant.
Another issue, and this is one of the city's own making, but it creates kind of the same, mindset that, you know, Flagstaff is out of business. It's all these student housing projects with the vacant, commercial, pieces underneath them. There doesn't seem to be any interest whatsoever in leasing those spaces out. I know there was a couple leased out in the standard, but I think of all the commercial spaces in several student housing development projects, those are the only two that have been leased. And I think some of these developers who have built these projects never built those commercial spaces with ever any real intent to leasing them out. They were just doing it because they were told they had to if they wanted to build what they were building.
Right.
So I don't know what we do about those and what we do with that, but to me, those send the same message as all these boarded up buildings send, is that we're out of business. Look at all these vacant, commercial spaces.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't send a good message.
I know how to fix it, but it'll be separate from this.
Yeah. Well, I hope you know how to fix it.
We've had some conversations on that issue of the mixed use and why the commercial part it always lags way behind the residential, but, welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
I'm Dan, by the way.
Hi, I'm Katie.
Katie,
I live in the little greenhouse on the corner right there.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, yeah.
That's us. Thank you.
And so feel free to jump in at any
Will
time.
do,
You
yeah.
kind of get the gist. We're talking about what kind of issues should be included in a property care ordinance. We started talking about the conditions of the property. Now we started talking about structures themselves. So paint is kind of the one that can be, like we should or shouldn't, but what about things like, failing roofs, broken windows, things like that? Is there a consensus that those are things that should be addressed in a property care ordinance?
Dan, wouldn't that be more of a building situation?
It can be, but it has to be considered dangerous. So it has to meet a definition of a dangerous building for a building official to get involved. I mean, that's a tool we currently have, but these property care ordinances typically have things on, rotting wood, broken windows, a failing roof that's sagging. You could notify the owner and say I would say it's a lesser of a standard than what we currently have, because what happens now is if we think a building is unsafe or a community member contacts us and says we think it's unsafe, we'll have an inspector go out there, we'll try to make contact with the owner, do some type of an inspection. It depends on whether the owner is willing to, kind of let them on the property or not. But they try to do an assessment from the exterior, and that's hard to do, right? Is it dangerous or not? Whereas a property care ordinance, I think, is a lesser standard, right? If you just visually see that it's in disrepair, that could be a violation, but it may not rise to the level of being unsafe. So I think that's where a property care ordinance can be different from our building code, which addresses dangerous buildings.
In some instances out there, I can think of a house on Fontaine. My concern isn't really that the house is an eyesore. My concern is the structure safe for the person that's living in it.
All right.
Because the last thing I want is to cruise down and see, half the house is falling in on the guy. So those are the things that, I don't want to boot someone out so we can build some beautiful structure.
Right.
But I also want to know that it's not going to fall in on the next windstorm.
Right.
Just, let me add on to that, because it's been an interesting conversation, but at the same time, I told you my house is World War II ammunition boxes. It's got the old braided electrical stuff inside. And when electricians ever go in there, if they work on it, they're required to replace it all. And so I don't let them in.
Right.
I'll go fix it myself or get somebody who can fix it. But see, that's a safety and health concern. So you come into my house, which is 3,000 square feet. I really couldn't afford to have the whole thing rewired. And so just have to be careful, that's all. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, because if you can look at a house, there's a house just one block away, its roof is sagging like this, that thing needs to be torn down. Versus my house that has 1948 style electrical in it. That's probably not safe either. But, so that's where we have to be careful.
Yeah.
I do think we have to think about, there are some historic construction conditions in Flagstaff, like the ammo boxes, where some of those conditions are not dangerous, but they exist and they, from the outside, it might look a little strange, but it's been totally stable for 100 years, so it's probably gonna stay that way as long as the wood's in good condition. And since a lot of those buildings are built out of hardwood, probably gonna stay a really long time. So, I mean, I think there is this like, what's just an old house and what's a house that's in disrepair. And that is when you write a property care ordinance, you can get more of both those, and if you write it too liberally, it can take on too many of them. So, you know, there is a safety standard for roofs. It's a little harder to enforce, but it can be enforced, so I sort of heard that maybe the roofs are, that safety standard's enough, or will people think we still wanna talk about that?
And I should add, you know, after this, we were gonna open up with just kind of a big discussion about what should be in a property care ordinance, but the next thing is to talk about the purpose, and the number one purpose is this health, safety, and welfare, like you were just talking about. You know, the purpose of a property care ordinance is to protect against hazardous and deteriorating conditions that negatively impact the health, safety, and welfare of the Flagstaff, Arizona community. And so that really is the overarching purpose, typically, right? We can craft and add to that as we want, but it is number one about the health and safety of the community. But yeah, I'm just wondering on this, I am hearing a big difference. I hear a lot of support for the exterior of properties, right, in people's yards and accumulation of trash and debris, but the structures is a tougher issue. I'm
Makes
sensing,
sense.
it's really hard, yeah.
Because a lot of people can't afford to put a new roof in.
Yeah.
So what are they gonna do if they start getting fined and,
Right.
you know, they'll be afraid.
Yeah.
And we don't want them to be afraid.
Well, that's if it's owner occupied.
And I think there's a
If
lot.
there's an absentee landlord that's making big bucks and lives in, you know, Beverly Hills, money shouldn't be an object.
Yeah.
So there's two categories, I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I know the city has some rehab monies and what have you, right?
We do. So also through our housing program, low-income folks can qualify for some housing rehab. We were doing it in-house. We now have a contract with Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. They're getting ready. We're waiting on some CDBG paperwork and stuff, but we're getting ready to start that program again. And that's one where, yeah, you income qualify. It's for owner-occupied homes. And it is to do some of that.
About having a rental occupied program too, like they just haven't piloted it yet.
And so how do we compel absentee landlords to invest in their property? I mean, I guess this is kind of an overarching question too.
I think one of the things that, you know, for the rental properties, a lot of those landlords, they'll say, great, I'll do all that, and then I'll raise the rent $200 a month, or whatever it happens to be. And so it's not the landlord who takes the hit, it's the tenant who takes the hit. You know, and that's the challenge, is to get rental absentee landlords to comply. They'll just pass the cost on, and probably exorbitantly so.
Yeah.
To their tenants, and they'll still wind up doing just fine on the property. I do think that one of the fears that people have when the city starts showing up with, you know, whether it's written notifications or whatever, is that the heavy hand of government is gonna come and tell us that we have to rewire our house, we have to replace all the windows, we have to bring it up to code, we have to do this, we have to do that. And so there is gonna be that certain level of fear.
I mean, should we be thinking about certain issues are subject to penalties, other issues are not subject to penalties? It's more about contacting and trying to get people in touch with resources. And I mean, do you think some of these issues should be enforced differently? Some would be subject to penalty, others not. Is that an idea we should be pursuing?
As a person who rents, I think so. Just because there are some things that as a person who is responsible for the property, as a renter, I can physically move trash. I can physically do these things personally. But there are some things that as a renter, I'm technically responsible for this property, but I can't replace the roof or take care of the paint or anything like that. My landlord should and could and I'm lucky, I have a good landlord, he's very, very responsive, like, hey, I need something, he's like, I'm on it. But I feel very fortunate in that regard. So with some of it, it could be like, hey, knock on the door, we see that your roof is starting to sag a little bit. Are you property owner or you renter? Like, oh, who's your landlord? Reach out to them, like, here's some resources to help improve the condition of your property, improve the health and safety of your tenants. And yeah, it'll of course bump up the property value too, which may negatively impact my rent. But if we're focusing on the health and safety of people, I think having a way to reach out to folks and provide resources and education and information could be invaluable.
Maybe having, okay, and I don't know how to put this, you have 3 or 4 notices to the landlord, because a lot of times absentee landlords just don't care. I was walking the neighborhood trying to get people to sign up for some money, and the guy who was the property manager says the landlord don't care. They don't care. They don't want to come in. They don't want to take out the drywall. They don't want to take, the people had to move out.
Yeah.
They just didn't care because they have a lot of properties, not only in Flagstaff, but everywhere else. But, so then what I'm suggesting is, maybe what there should be is 3 notices. Now the city does start in with, applying an ordinance that's going to affect them.
Yeah.
But then we go back to those people who, not just in Sunnyside or Plaza Vieja, but people that don't have the money to do it. And then maybe that's where Jess's group and our group come in and say, look, or the city, it doesn't matter who, say, look, we have these rehab things.
Right.
And it's gonna cost you a little of next to nothing if you're a homeowner. Now, if you're a renter, it's not true.
Yeah. Yes.
I've seen the program for low income, but I also think we need something for our middle income. There's lots of resources for both ends, but it's our middles that we sometimes forget about, and these are probably the folks that we're going to be chatting with, where they're still living paycheck to paycheck, maybe a little bit in the bank, but it's those individuals that I don't want us to forget about as well. And so I don't know if that's like a sliding fee scale for things.
No, I like that. Resources for, you can just say all incomes even.
Yeah.
Like some things that are an example of one that wouldn't be income dependent would be like a heritage preservation grant.
Right.
I think, are you in the property that you worked with Mark on?
Well, Mark worked with us, but we only qualified for the windows. We don't
Okay.
But
But I think some of those are not income dependent, right? The heritage.
That one was
preservation
not,
grants. It's
no.
about the structure, right? If
Yeah.
the structure qualifies.
If your house is over 50 years old
Yeah.
and maybe eligible for the local register, then Mark has 7 $10,000 grants left that you can apply
Yeah.
for by May 25th.
We took one of them.
Your house would qualify, I think, for one of these heritage preservation
Yeah.
grants.
Except that I put windows and stuff in it.
Yeah.
Electric.
Yeah, there you go.
For you.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, we just did a major renovation. I would say, no, don't do it.
But I think that is something we've talked about in the past with the neighborhoods, about a neighborhood services department or hub, where you could say, hey, you might not qualify for this, but if your house is over 50 years old and it's an exterior change, then you might apply for the historic preservation grant. And here's how we can help you determine if you're eligible for it or not. We have those resources, they just don't all live in one place still.
Did you have a comment, Tiffany or Michelle?
No, I guess just kind of add on to both of what a lot of people are saying. It's almost like this is a property care program. Maybe there's an ordinance attached with the education component that Tiffany brought up, but then also the hub where it connects everybody to the resources and to the different associations. So, because I mean, even I like the idea of the sliding scale, because what was pointed out is it's going to go on to the renter anyway, and a lot of our renters are lower income or they're students, but it's going to get passed on to people we're trying to protect anyway. So we shouldn't rule out the people who are medium and high income.
Yeah. And I will share, we do hear from tenants about life safety issues. You know, the risk for them is, I guess, under the current rules is they could be displaced, right? If they call and say, my landlord won't do anything, right, I don't have running water. Well, if we go out and do an inspection and deem it uninhabitable, they have to vacate the premise, right? And so, and that happens. We just had one last month. It wasn't the tenant who called, but a neighbor called about, I'll just call it an ADU that a student was living in. And it didn't have, it had an extension cord running out to it, was what was supplying power. There was actually an open drain that was just going out to the backyard. I mean, you know, these are serious life safety where somebody just has built this ADU.
How much was the rent?
You know what?
$1,000.
He's actually paying rent to live in that place, yeah.
Somebody
And so,
converted it.
that
to
happens.
once into a house, it was
Yeah.
interesting.
I hope it was a large chicken.
No, it was not, it was a shockingly small
It
thing.
happens with garages and
Yeah.
RVs that too.
Yeah, this was a shed originally, I'm sure. And then they converted it into a living space. All right, we're kind of all over the place, but what else we'll go back to exterior yards and all that, but on structures itself, what else,
I'd
Jesse?
like to touch on attractive nuisance.
Yeah.
I think that's that, what is it, the curb appeal. And, you know, we always, from what I'm reading here, is, you know, criminal activity. And I think that gets back to what Laura was talking about, overgrown vegetation, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't belong to me. Why just rent the place? Not my problem. So I think something like that, and I'll tell you this story because I think I told it to you before. I have some property down in Camp Verde. I got a letter from the town of Camp Verde telling me that my tumbleweeds were taller than 6 inches. I said, yeah, they all are. And I have to go and clean it up and what have you, with John's new truck. John's old truck, that's my new truck. Anyways, but it was, I mean, that little town of Camp Verde gave me a notice, but it was a nice notice. It wasn't one of those that we're gonna come and put you in jail, we need up 30 days, and so I called the town of Camp Verde, they were real nice about it. They said, yeah, just do the best you can. And it was a trigger. Somebody turned me in.
Right.
So, you know, it did need it to be done. But tumbleweeds are always hard to miss 6 inches.
Well, this is another one of the hot button issues. It's back to the property. But we don't have a rule right now about you can't allow weeds to grow more than 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches. We don't have that now. Is that something we should have? Should we be, this is again a common thing you'll see in the off-the-shelf property maintenance ordinance. We don't currently regulate, and the other challenge that comes up with that is, you know, manicured lawns versus natural landscaping. Some natural landscaping is intended to be grasses, wild grasses are not 6 inches, right? And they can be very attractive. So I bring it up, I guess, at my own risk here. Should we be including something like that about weeds, the height of
Attractive
weeds?
grasses coming out of the crack in the curb is one thing.
Yeah. So keeping sidewalks free and clear, like we do, I think, a good job of that. So shrubs that are blocking a sidewalk, you know, growth that's potentially not allowing somebody to use a sidewalk. We have that now, and that'll be in the PCO. That's kind of in the public
I
ways
actually like
section.
what you have in here, it may cause harm, so
Yeah.
people are criminal too.
What would you consider an attractive nuisance, Jesse? I struggle with this one a little bit. Attractive nuisance.
It's that mattress that's in the front yard
All right.
that they're using as a trampoline or something like that.
Okay.
It's an attractive nuisance. Or all the kids are going and playing in that abandoned car with broken windows. That's an attractive nuisance. And for some reason I thought there was a regulation or rule that says anything that's bigger than 8 foot or 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot visible from the street or alleyway is supposed to be
Oh, really?
ugly.
In our current code, we have something like that?
I just remember that was one of the rules that Clean and Green, anybody remember Clean and Green?
And Reggie will normally be here. I should add, he's out right now,
But I mean, it's something that I mean is an attractive nuisance.
Yeah. No, those are good examples. Thank you.
I had two like the shrubs next to my mom's house, remember they were like about 8 feet tall, and you and Reggie walk
Yeah.
around, and it was like, we don't have anything that, well, you know, you couldn't see the neighbor, or if there was something behind the bush, so something like that, I think, is also important.
Something that like inhibits your view
Yeah.
from being able to like
Safety, yeah.
go around the
We had
corner
to go
safely.
do it ourselves, because sometimes people can't just purposely
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These were just overgrown, or the, yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't in between a house, it was all along the whole, it was crazy.
You know, I had a swing set that, there's a bunch of kids playing in my yard, and I let kids play in my yard if they're neighbors, but they have to come ask. I had none of these guys. And I said, where are you guys from? I said, well, we're from the neighborhood. I says, you didn't come ask me, but it's a big swing set. And I'm like, it wasn't attractive nuisance, and I'm like, dang.
Liability.
Yes, liability. And I'm not gonna hide it, it was pretty, it was a nice set. Can't blame them for wanting to swing, but that was definitely an attractive nuisance.
Yeah.
So we can't include something like that.
Well, that's another challenge with these are, yeah, one person's treasure is somebody else's trash, right? I mean, Reggie hears that a lot. Somebody doesn't like what's in someone's yard and they think it's garbage, and the guy's like, well, no, this isn't garbage, I'm not gonna get rid of it, this is valuable to me, right?
We've got the car hood, it's part of the, oh yeah, I think it looks cool, but I knew a lot of people could complain about it, so.
It's a 64 Chevy truck hood. It's the porch.
Is it like an alternative building material, like the ammo
It's
boxes?
by Airbnb, and it's the Route 66 house, if you wanna rent it.
Alright. What, it has a piece of vehicle incorporated into the house?
It's the porch.
The porch? Oh.
On the,
Oh, like the roof
Yeah.
and the porch? Oh, that's inventive, that's cool.
It's 15 foot wide by 140 feet long. The house.
Okay.
I was gonna say, that's a big car.
All right, well, we've talked a little bit about the specific issues. What about if you go to this list of the standards, right, that I mentioned? There's 10 of them. Yes.
Is this residential and commercial, so our commercial properties would need to follow this as well?
It is, so, I mean, this is another issue we can, figure out through this process, but typically they apply to, yes, residential and commercial properties and industrial. So really, all property in the city would be subject to a property code ordinance. Yeah. And so we presented these as kind of a suggestion of 10 kind of overarching categories, right? That we can figure out what the more specific language would be. And I guess my question for the group is, can you think of things that you think should be covered that wouldn't be included by one of these, right? So, we talked a lot about the condition of property and the accumulation of debris. I think that one's covered pretty well here. You've got debris accumulation, removal of hazards again, hazardous materials. Think of like an oil drum or something, right? That's been left out and is falling apart. Inoperable equipment and vehicles. We do currently have rules on this, and this is something we'll have to be doing as part of this, is kind of bringing other sections of the code to one together, right? You don't want competing sections of the code. We do have language right now that vehicles have to be operable and be licensed, right? So Reggie can
be registered.
licensed and registered.
Just registered. Registered non-op, it would still sit out there.
So registered. I always say licensed with a tag, but I guess it could just be registered. And it's supposed to be operable, right? So you can start it up, the tires aren't flat. So Reggie does deal with these, but this would be potentially part of this. Attractive nuisance, I think, could be one that would capture quite a few things. Jesse gave some good examples, like an abandoned car, which would maybe be captured by something else, but like appliances that are left out, or certainly can be dangerous, an attractive nuisance for kids. Perimeter property perimeter. So this one maybe touches on what you were talking about, Laura, a little bit. The idea that if somebody had a shrub or some condition that was encroaching either into the right of way or on a neighboring property, that it created maybe an unsafe condition. We talked about abandoned and vacant buildings. Street frontages, this again, I think is relating to keeping things kind of neat and orderly. So again, you're not impacting property values. I think the key is, we're gonna have to really flush these out, right? What about the street frontage are we looking at, right? You were talking about like weeds coming up in the sidewalk, conditions that again are impacting values and desirability. We've talked a lot about garbage pickup, recycling, and refuse containers. Again, I think this will be bringing some of our solid waste rules into this section. We do have rules about, you are supposed to put it out like the night before and take it in the next day. You're not supposed to leave it out all week. But again, we would bring these all together.
Do those exist right now, or they don't?
They do. We do. We have stuff in our solid waste code that you're not supposed to take it out more than 24 hours, I think, before your pickup, and you're supposed to bring it back 24 hours after.
So
It's either 12 or 24. It's Reggie, code compliance, works on that with solid waste. They also work with solid waste on issues when they don't have enough containers, right? So we get a lot of calls about this property consistently has overflowing garbage cans. And so we'll go out and say, you need more carts, right? Either you need extra carts and they have to pay for them, but that's why they typically don't want them. But we can require them to get extra carts or even move to a dumpster if the carts aren't practical anymore.
it's Park Street, they're out of by itself. And they have a ton of,
Yeah.
they just leave them there. I think that people go from their house to the container. You know
Rather
what I
than
mean?
never moving
Just
it,
leave
yeah.
it there.
Yeah. No, but they are supposed to bring those back. Yeah. And then vacant undeveloped property, this actually gets into what we were talking about, the Arrowhead Village site. And I'll have Reggie go out and take a look at that, since you brought it up. I'm sure
We had,
you probably emailed him on it.
police department had to be called last week over the.
Oh, I saw that.
Over the garbage can and the contractor.
Is that the fight with the contractor? I saw that.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
It's unfortunate it escalated so quickly. So do you think we've captured everything? Are there things like on this list, things that you don't think, issues you're thinking about that wouldn't fit into one of these categories, right? Are there other things we need to be considering? You want to just, we're going to go through each through these over the next meetings, right? So the idea is we're going to go down this list and start giving you language on debris accumulation, kind of defining it and what would be a violation. And then similar, just going on down the list, trying to capture the issues.
The property care ordinance would be for both commercial and residential.
It would apply to all property.
Everybody.
Yep, so industrial, commercial, residential.
Cause I hadn't even thought about what Rick said about ugly buildings
I
I
think-
built until now, I'm like, oh.
Well, I think public property, I mean, there is this issue of hierarchy of government, right? You know, the state doesn't have to follow city rules, but we would contact them about these issues, we absolutely do. And typically they're pretty responsive, public agencies, on these kind of issues. So, but yeah, it would be subject to all property in Flagstaff.
Yeah, that made me think about when you said that about NAU stuff. I'm thinking about East Flag, and there's all those motels that are vacant. You know, 2 of them that were just bought up for homeless and
Yeah.
low income, and they're boarded up and they're, you know, not the one in front of the Crown, but the other one, that old Travel Lodge that was right there. They boarded up and it's,
Houses Shoes bought
Yeah.
that one. And then the shelter bought the one at the railroad restaurant. What is it called? The Crown Royal. Yep. Now this is a trend because there's funding at the state level. It's federal money through the state to buy these properties for
I just
transitional
wish they
housing.
wouldn't do it on the main drag. I'm like, dang.
Yeah.
Doesn't bode well for the businesses on the east side.
Well, I think about the kids' safety more than that. And if there's a bunch of kids there, there's no playground or anything on the streets right there. You know, the main street doesn't stop. That was one of my concerns, because the kids have to have some green space, hopefully, you know, they need somewhere to go play and
Hi. They got the museum plan.
The bowling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are, like, when they redo them, are some of those things required, or?
So yeah, there are rules in the building code about what triggers bringing something up to code. I mean, up to code is basically you'd have to scrap it and start over, right? Because construction methods, everything have changed so much over time. But no, there are certain things they are going to be putting in like kitchenettes into those, so they're going to become kind of efficiency apartments. I know at least the ones that Housing Solutions purchased, the old Travel Lodge, so they'll have a bathroom, a little kitchenette, so it's like an efficiency apartment. So they are going to be investing in remodeling the interiors, but like they don't have to rewire in that typically,
Oh, I was just
unless
like outside space.
I like your example.
I don't think open space is not a requirement of homeless or emergency shelters.
And pulling a remodel permit, I don't think we get into things like providing civic space and open space. It's not like starting over with a new site plan where you have to meet all these different requirements in our zoning code. Is that what you're asking? Like, could we require a playground or?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I'm just thinking of the quality of life for kids.
they should have something for kids to do there, yeah.
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 I don't, that's just.
Yeah.
I didn't care.
But I'm thinking this is a good starting place is what I'm sensing.
It is.
And let's jump into it,
Yeah,
yeah?
I'll just keep looking. I
Yeah.
have to go over the old one too.
Yeah,
Are you gonna bring a lot of stuff?
so
from
I stopped bringing the old one because we're just trying to think,
That's
let's just
okay.
get away from it.
Yeah.
But I can bring it back.
Well, no, the only thing is, I
Yeah.
think they probably have a lot of ideas, so we don't have.
There
to
are.
reinvent the wheel.
Yep, there are. And so what we're gonna do is Mark is gonna start drafting these property care standards, Mark Revis. And so that's what we're gonna be bringing in the ensuing meetings, is we'll be bringing drafts, and we can bring, we need to rely on, kind of the model property maintenance ordinances for inspiration. And that is kind of our guide, but again, we're trying to write it in a way that's not so legalese and a little more flag-centric. All right, so the last thing I wanted to try to do today, which we do have time, we've got about 30 more minutes, is to start looking at the title, the purpose, and the intent. And so that was another handout that we provided. And it's pretty simple, straightforward, but again, we're just looking for some input, and obviously, we get through these issues today, we can always come back and revisit it, because you're just seeing it, you're gonna be thinking about it over the next few weeks. And so we just want some input if we're missing things, if there's words in here you don't like, subjects we need to be covering. So I'll just read it. The title: "This chapter shall be known and may be cited as the property care ordinance of the city of Flagstaff. Within this chapter, it may be known as a PCO. The purpose of the property care ordinance is to protect against hazardous and deteriorating conditions that negatively impact the health, safety, welfare of the Flagstaff, Arizona community, and by establishing minimum requirements for the care of buildings and their land, and to preserve existing building and housing stock with sustainable practices, and to mitigate the impacts of gentrification and displacement, and with compliance consistently applied without undue hardship." The intent: "This PCO shall be applied and enforced fairly, sensibly, consistently, and reasonably to promote the care of all buildings and land in the city, where owners will be notified per a series of notices and a process provided in this chapter, with sufficient time to rectify the problem, with resources noted for compliance and for those with economic challenges." So I think some of this language you would not typically see, right? We're really trying to kind of set the stage for what we've talked a lot about, is how does this get enforced? How do we help folks who don't have resources? And so that's our attempt to try to be a little, kind of set the tone for how we want to use it, right?
In intent, I think it might be important to include an educational component
All right.
of that, because I think, all of the neighborhoods that currently aren't served by an HOA need to be educated on this new ordinance, and also to identify resources for those people that can't afford to do some of the things that might be required by this property care ordinance. We should make sure that they're educated on where to go and find the resources that could help.
Yeah. I thought it was a great comment earlier about the notices even including information about
Right.
resources, right? Great,
And
thank you for
it's a
that
perfect
comment.
fit for neighborhood associations where this information goes to them. I mean, you'll also have it.
Yeah.
But if you go to a local and we have meetings every month,
Mhm.
that some could be set aside for the education, for specific, or we answer the phones and we can give out some of that information because it's there given out by someone locally.
That's a great add, thank you for that. What else, what do you think, first blush?
In intent, at the last line says, noted for compliance and for those with economic challenges, maybe including or other challenges, because it could be a physical challenge, like, hey, I physically can't do this. Not necessarily an economic problem or a challenge.
All right,
Age issues.
Hey, people with disabilities
Yeah.
of any sort, like,
no, and that's, I think, pretty common when Reggie and his team knock on a door, they do hear about a list of challenges that owners have, and, so that's a good comment.
And sometimes, part of that educational and resource component, there are people that can afford to hire somebody to take care of it, but they don't know who to call. They don't know who does that, I mean, I was just reading today, actually not reading, but one of the agents that's on this advocacy committee with me, she was talking about a friend who has started a nonprofit where they use disabled people to do yard maintenance. And they charge $35 an hour, and it's a 3-person team with a supervisor, and they can show up and do yard maintenance, for people.
Yeah.
Well, it's having resources like that, that are available, because sometimes that is, especially with the older people, they don't know where to go to get somebody to do
Right.
certain things.
What else is jumping out at you about the title, the purpose, and the intent? Things you like or dislike about it?
I think it covers most.
No, I'd asked my wife, and it's on here, I quizzed her first, but I have an SNA meeting tonight. So,
Oh, okay.
just to discuss.
You're gonna bring some of these materials to your meeting tonight? All right.
I was gonna say that under purpose, the last line says, without undue hardship, and that's such I think a critical line in all of this, because the point of this is not to burden anyone.
Right.
It's to improve everyone's
Or
life.
displace them from their home.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
really not what we want.
Yeah.
That somebody who was, in such a hard shape that, that's not the intent of this. It's to keep people in their homes and try to invest in our housing stock.
Are you using hazardous and dangerous as synonyms?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Are you using hazardous and, dangerous as synonyms? Because we don't have dangerous up there, but we have in the very first line under under purpose, to protect against hazardous and deteriorating.
Are you suggesting we should include dangerous, or?
I don't know if that's the case, but I don't know if that's a word that's more understood than hazardous,
Yeah.
or does hazardous represent something different than dangerous?
No, that's a good comment. I mean, we do use the term dangerous building, like in our building code, and it's defined, right? So some of these terms we would typically define as well.
Okay.
I don't know if we've defined hazardous and dangerous building, but a lot of times with these kind of ordinances, you will define some of these terms.
Yeah.
Because you need to do that.
Yeah.
So, maybe the comment is, we need to, should we include dangerous, and how do we define these, hazardous and dangerous?
Then obviously in multiple languages, our ordinance, we would have it translated into
It's a good comment. I don't think our city code is in Spanish. I'm looking at Jesse. I don't know why. I would think you would know, but.
I would just, something that she said, affecting the quality of life of everybody. I mean, the neighbor doesn't take care of his side of the yard, it affects the quality of my life.
Right.
And I think that's a buzzword in the city, when we open those meetings or something.
To protect the quality of life of our citizens.
So I think we should add it into there, so it sort of ties it into what the city mission is.
Or, yeah, it impacts the health, safety, welfare, and quality of life of the place staff. Or something.
Yeah.
Because I think it just ties it into the city mission. Maybe the city council will pass it this time.
Your question about multiple languages, I'm just trying to remember, we did translate something.
Recently, we started translating some of our applications.
Yeah.
I don't believe that we've done that wholesale to the code, but we could maybe on that. Yeah, it's a good question, it's a good point.
And I think the wildfire information for the evacuation stuff has been
They
translated.
do that in both
Yeah.
English and Spanish, yeah.
So maybe it could be done for just, as we take this out to different people for comment, so we're making sure we're getting all voices heard.
Yeah.
Well, if we put together, educational materials, basically is where we would use it in both English and Spanish, so. So capturing, you just said educational materials in Spanish, yeah, for multiple languages, great.
And then I don't know if there's other languages that we find that are prevalent in Flagstaff that we
Yeah.
also.
On that note, as we're developing materials that can be accessed online, making sure it's capable to be read using a screen reader for anyone who's blind or has low vision.
All right.
That's in like our process or not?
Yeah, I don't know anything about that issue. Is that something that's embedded in websites? Like, so for the
Yeah.
blind, it'll read it to them, or they have a program that reads the content?
Yeah, exactly. So city websites themselves are pretty well set up that way because you have like, here's the title, here's the body text, and screen readers will go through and read each one of those as it should be, where there's like gaps in the right places. So instead of having like City of Flagstaff, like read off of City of Flagstaff, here's the body. But if we're developing things in Word or PDF and using those as like attachments, there's a lot more of a challenge to make sure that they're, I have a background with the federal government, and is 508 compliant is what I often refer to it as. Something to keep in mind.
All right. Did you have something, Jesse?
Yeah, but I forgot. Okay.
We'll come back to
A
this.
memory recorder.
These are all great comments. Anything else we want to capture right now on the purpose and intent?
Oh, I know what it was. The housing section, how do they fit into this? Property care, how do they fit in? Like, where do they come in? When we talk about affordable housing and housing rehab and all that stuff, we wanna make sure they're connected.
Yeah. I think
What
probably
programs
the,
do they have, that kind, it's part of the educational
Right.
process, probably. So
I
I just wanna
mean-
make sure they're in part of the group.
yeah. No, I mean, I've thought about putting Sarah on the distribution list of this, Sarah Dar, our housing director. Certainly the housing program side of the division, or the section, is probably, and that's where like our housing rehabilitation program lives, and other assistance programs are on the program side, because I think of it as housing authority and then housing programs. And so on the program side is probably where we would have resources for folks.
Well, I know we had issues with CDBG, because we don't,
Yeah.
we really did, as our neighborhood associations, all three of ours, is that we don't understand sometimes the regulations. They're thinking this way, we're thinking this way, we just do not match. And so we need to make sure that we're all involved,
Yeah.
especially in the rehab part.
Yeah.
Or owner occupied rehab, Sarah, I think mentioned a rental unit. I hadn't heard that one before.
Yeah. No, we can, I could start inviting Jennifer Michelson and Justina, and we can bring housing staff into this. I think the program side is appropriate. Yeah. Anything else? You've all been great today. I just want to thank you all for participating. I think it's been a great discussion. Anything we didn't talk about today that you wanted to talk about, that you didn't have a chance
I
at
did
our
want to
first meeting?
compliment John.
All right.
I'll tell you why, he's my neighbor, Absentee, landlord neighbor. So I have him on speed dial. He's great. But I know that he's one of the good guys, put it this way. Because he's got, how many kids have you got? 20, 30?
Like students that I house, over 150.
Yeah, I knew you had a few. But anyways, so I'm just wondering how he feels about this. I mean, like I say, there's other absentee landlords that
They're at.
Well, John's here, so he's obviously not absentee, right?
Right, so I mean, one of my questions with property care, we didn't touch at all about city parks. Example, this one right here.
Yeah.
That one's we're working on that.
Cause it's truly been huge, you know, we own the property next door.
Yep.
And so I've done a lot to get a better quality of folks in those properties. But it's really hard when you continually have that environment right there. So.
I guess that might be an example of an attractive nuisance.
Yeah.
There's something about that location that is attractive and creates a nuisance.
no, I used to be a street.
And so there is a plan, it's been approved for funding through CDBG to implement, I think we're calling it the Murdoch Center Park, but we're gonna redo this and actually on over to the Murdoch property. And so right now, it hasn't gotten final approval yet from council, but it is recommended for funding. And that would happen probably starting this calendar year. We're gonna try to do a lot of it internally with our Parks Department and with Mark in neighborhood planning. So yeah, I think the idea is you gotta open it up, get a little more visibility.
Right, I think they did away with the bushes that would.
They make it, and if they make it more like a park, then it falls under park ordinance, and then it can be,
They're gonna maintain
Yeah,
it, and come
yeah.
and clean it every day, and pick up
and
the
then
garbage.
there will be park hours on it and things, yeah.
Compared to the park that's by your house, they're just night and day.
And so we're following what was in the South Side plan for this park. There was a plan that was shown in there, a conceptual plan for this park and the Murdoch property. Doing some work out here, making a little plaza out here. I think we're gonna have money to do that, to be able to do that as a phase 2. But no, the city needs to be accountable for maintaining our property, in fairness to your point. All of our property, yeah.
I guess the question for you is, how do we reach out to the other landlords that have, I mean, what are some, it'd be interesting to hear their side of what they're hearing, because I mean, I think some of it may be that they don't care, or it's just
Some
a
of it is
money
that,
maker, but I'm sure there's other things as well.
So I just took on 2 apartment buildings, it's funny because you had brought up people buying buildings. So there's a building over on University, which just sold to a new owner. And this owner wants to come in and he wants to completely redo the building, put air conditioning in it, really update the building. Along with that came, those tenants were paying $750 a month rent. The owner paid top dollar for that property, so that owner has no option but to raise the rent. So those units are now gonna go from $1,750 to $1,500 a month. I have another property I just brought on Southside on 3rd that was just recently sold. Those units went from $1,000 to $1,650 when that owner took over. So I see, it's people from the outside that are buying these properties that are, yes, they're putting money into them, but they're buying them for investments and to make money. So, and with the market rate in Flagstaff, as far as rents goes, they do continue to go up. And I've done a lot with really trying to do affordable housing. The Americana project that was just sold, that owner also bought the Santa Fe apartment building. The plan with that is to do some affordable housing in that complex. Within that, where the old lamplighter was, their intent is to make that be a big park in there. So there are things happening. most of the landlords I work with are really open to keeping their property out and moving forward. A lot of the ones that are challenging to work with, they're really more out of the state people. That's what I find. Anybody that I manage that are in state, they're really responsive. I have a couple that are out of state and it's like pulling teeth. So.
Which makes sense, right? Because they're not a part of our community.
Right.
No. They're skin in the game.
But one of the things that I really try to do as a property manager is I invite my owners up, come, let's walk the property, let's look at it. And that's one of the things that's in their contract. At least twice a year, they have to come visit their property. So we can point out, these things we need to address as capital expenses moving forward. And I just think for a lot of landlords, I think it's getting to that point that you need to have some physical presence if you're gonna own property there.
Any other comments, questions, topics to cover? For our first meeting, we're gonna do this again in 2 weeks. I'll send out an updated schedule with the time because of the other meeting that's happening that night. Just trying to remember if there was anything else. Oh, so I am continuing to reach out to folks, right? So we have some names from people from a survey and the survey continues to be open as a way to just generate interest. So I'm gonna continue to contact folks and try to cast a wider net. We're hoping to have more participation. I think one of the keys to getting this successfully adopted is going to be to have more people participating at the front end, right? And so hopefully we'll get a wider range of folks here at future meetings, but I'm going to continue to do that. So I just wanted to let you know.
You know, oh, go ahead.
Is there a way to reach out to other property owners through like the GIS website to find out who the actual owner is and let them know that we're in the process of going through this and establishing something so that for the owners that have this mentality, it's out of place, out of mind, it now puts at the forefront, wait a minute, the city is getting ready to do something to maybe complete a survey or see what's really happening.
So we could do that. I mean, if there are specific properties or if you know of folks who have multiple properties around town, if you give me their name and if you have the contact, we'll put them on our distribution list. I'll reach out to them. I'll add anybody you want to the list. I've got like a blind, I've created this group email now with blind CC so people can see, so it's a little more private, I guess. But I'd love to add other property managers, owners. And if you just know of a property, we can try to track down who the owner is. We can look it up, and Reggie has a way of trying to get contact information from owners.
You might also want to contact the HOA at the country club.
Okay.
Because there are quite a few properties within the country club that are not part of the HOA. And so the HOA has no way of reaching out to those property owners and insisting that they pick up their pine needles and do stuff like that. So they might want to know about this ordinance. Because then they know there's a resource where they can call the city on a complaint basis to talk about the next door neighbor that doesn't pick up their pine needles or whatever it happens to be.
I think we have a contact there from Reggie, so I'll check in with him. Yeah, anyone else you want us to track down, just send me, you can email me anytime on this stuff. All right.
Okay.
I think I'm going to turn off the recording.